Hi, I'm Alex Alguacil, concert pianist and piano professor at Conservatory of Liceu in Barcelona, and this is the second part of a presentation about Fantasia Bética by Manuel de Falla. In the first part, I talked about the Spanish harmonies and melodies and how Falla uses them in Fantasia Bética, and in this second part, I will talk about the instruments that Falla wants to transfer to the piano, like the guitar, percussion instruments, or the human voice.
In my opinion, it is better to enjoy listening or even performing Fantasia Bética if we imagine this fantasy as a compendium, as a group of different aspects of the flamenco music. We can also imagine that this fantasy is a performance of a flamenco ensemble with all its instruments, singers, and dancers. If you have never heard a flamenco group before, I encourage you to do so in order to get an idea of the rhythm and the power of the performance.
Let's see how Manuel de Falla writes in Fantasia Bética many different instruments of the flamenco ensemble. So the principal instrument of Spanish music is the guitar, and Falla writes in this piece many examples that could resemble a guitar. For example, the open strings on the guitar sound like this. And Falla writes in Fantasia Bética passages that resemble a guitar. Sometimes he puts on a voice, a melody, and a guitar accompanying this voice. Some other times he just writes the resonance of the guitar when accompanying a voice. Some other times he just writes arpeggios to expand the harmony of a particular chord. And also he uses the whole range of the keyboard, writes glissandos that could be interpreted as a guitar playing a Frisian scale. Then he puts it in combination with the Spanish cadence.
Falla writes occasionally simple arpeggios that sound like a guitar. In fact, this is a piece that any arpeggio is likely to imitate a guitar, like or and even embellishments that accompany chords or short quick scales resemble a guitar, like here, imitating again the open strings and rasgueados of the guitar.
Sometimes he would write rasgueados, which are quick and fast arpeggios on the guitar, accompanied by punteados, which are quick notes as a melody. It is also worth noticing how Falla requires to the pianist to be playing in a very close and uncomfortable position, and since the hand has to be very stiff and there's no relaxing of the muscles, the result is exactly what Falla wants, to resemble the quick, fast and aggressive arpeggio of the guitar. As you see, many examples on Fantasia Bética that can resemble a guitar. Another instrument that Falla puts in his Fantasia Bética is the human voice. But not only the voice, but the flamenco voice. Flamenco singers use a special technique in which they sing microtones. And microtones are notes that are between a semitone.
A semitone is the smallest distance we have at the piano, the smallest distance between two notes. But flamenco singers can sing slightly within a semitone and therefore creating more notes.
Since we cannot do that in the piano because the semitone is the smallest distance, Falla writes in a very special way to create the illusion of hearing microtones. For example, he takes this melody he harmonizes it like this. So by putting these dissonances together, with the help of the pedal and the resonance of the piano, we have the illusion of hearing some extra notes that are between these semitones. Another basic feature of Spanish music is, of course, the rhythm. And Falla puts in Fantasia Bética many passages with a very strong and characteristic rhythm, very aggressive, that sometimes is made by the shoes of the dancers, that is a zapateado, or the clapping of the hands of the whole flamenco group, like this. Or for example, like this. And sometimes he writes the rhythm in combination with other instruments, like for example, the guitar. And by the end of the piece, in the coda, he will combine all the instruments of the flamenco ensemble, the guitar, the zapateado, even the turning around of the dancers. This is, of course, my own personal interpretation, the image that I have when I perform this piece, but I believe we can hear the combination of many different instruments. For example, we will hear the rasgueados of the guitar, or more aggressive ones. We will hear the very strict rhythm of the zapateado dancers. And I believe we can see also how the dancers turn around when Falla uses expanding arpeggios like, or I like to see the turning of the dancers in these up and down notes. So let's hear a little bit of the coda with all these different instruments I personally believe we can hear during the performance. I encourage you to listen to the piece and try to find and imagine your own.